He was just 19 when they threw him behind bars. Poor, black, and accused of a brutal crime he didn't commit. The trial lasted a week. The sentence? Life. Years later, DNA evidence proves beyond a doubt. He wasn't even there. But instead of freedom, the judge slams the door shut, citing procedural finality. Why would a court ignore science? What secrets are worth more than truth? And how does a man survive the weight of a justice system that would rather protect its mistakes than admit it was wrong? This is the haunting true story of a broken system, a buried life, and the quiet war for redemption that begins when the evidence is clear, but freedom is not. The first thing I remember is the siren, how it screamed louder than Mama's voice when she called me home for dinner. I was 19. Just a kid in sneakers, too clean to run in, hands in my hoodie, headphones on. I was walking home from the corner store with a grape soda in my right hand and change in my left. I didn't see the cruiser until it screeched sideways in front of me. 2 white officers jumped out like I'd already confessed to something I hadn't done. One yelled, "Hands!" The other already had his knee in my back. I couldn't breathe, but no one cared. They said a girl had been attacked 2 blocks away. Said I matched the description. Black, male, hoodie. That's all it took. My soda spilled on the sidewalk. The change scattered like my freedom, rolling into storm drains, never to be seen again. At the station, they called it a lineup, but I was the only one wearing a hoodie. They said the victim picked me. I never saw her face, only her voice through the one-way mirror, trembling like she wasn't sure but too scared to say no. I wanted to speak. I wanted to scream. But they told me to shut up if I knew what was good for me. They didn't want the truth. They wanted a body to fill the press release, a name to soothe the town. I gave them mine. My trial lasted 5 days. That's all it took. 5 days to erase 19 years. The prosecutor called me a predator. The judge let him. The jury looked like they already made up their minds the minute they saw me. Not one face looked like mine. Not one smile for my mother when she sat on the bench holding my baby photo in her lap. They said my alibi wasn't solid. Said I couldn't prove where I was between 8:14 and 8:26 p.m. I told them I was walking home from the store, alone. That made me guilty. They had no fingerprints, no DNA, just a scared girl and a city that needed closure. I got 35 years. I watched Mama cry so hard her hands shook when she reached for me. But they never let her touch me, not once. The first night in prison, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and whispered the Lord's Prayer backward like my cellmate taught me. Said it keeps the demons out. But the real demons didn't live in the shadows. They wore robes, badges, smiles. They said justice had been served. I said nothing. Years passed. Seasons changed without me. I grew taller. My voice dropped. My heart hardened. But inside, I was still 19, still standing on that sidewalk with soda on my hands and cuffs on my wrists. Time stopped for me, even as the world moved on. I watched cellmates come and go. Watched young men arrive full of fire, then turn into ghosts. Some never left. Some left in bags. I read books, wrote letters, filed appeals, prayed, waited, doubted, re-prayed. Then, 10 years in, something changed. A new law passed, something about post-conviction DNA testing for the wrongfully convicted. I didn't believe in miracles, but I filed a petition anyway. Weeks turned into months. Then a guard handed me a manila envelope. My hands shook when I opened it. Inside was a letter from the Innocence Project. They said my case caught their eye. They wanted to test the DNA found at the crime scene, under the victim's nails, on her clothes. I almost laughed. For the first time in a decade, someone was listening. The test took a year, a whole damn year. Every night I slept with that hope sitting on my chest like a weight. I dreamed of Mama, of the kitchen table, of music, of walking out into air that didn't smell like rust and bleach. Then it came. The DNA wasn't mine. Not on the shirt, not on the knife, not under her nails. None of it. I cried. I don't care what anybody says. Grown men cry when truth finally shows up after a decade of silence. My lawyer filed for immediate release. My cellmate packed my stuff for me. The guards gave me that look like they didn't want to believe it. But the judge, he said no. He said the evidence was new, but it didn't override the procedural integrity of the original trial. Said the jury had already spoken. Said justice must be final. Final? 10 years in a cage for something I didn't do? And that was final? I stared at the ceiling that night, and the demons came back. Not the kind my cellmate warned me about. The kind with gavels, with egos, with something to prove. I learned the judge's name that week. Judge Malcolm Sturgis, elected, old school, known for being tough on crime in a district that still waves Confederate flags on courthouse lawns. Rumor had it he once lost re-election because he granted parole to a young black man who reoffended. Since then, he never gave anyone a second chance, especially if they looked like me. But I didn't want revenge. I wanted release. The Innocence Project went public. News outlets started calling. Headlines said, "Man cleared by DNA still imprisoned." Cameras showed up outside the courthouse. Protesters held up my picture. Mama cried on national TV. I saw the clips through the grainy prison television. I hadn't heard her voice in years, but when she said, "My baby didn't do this," I knew hope was still breathing. That's when they sent her, Amara Jones. She wasn't like the other lawyers. She was younger, fierce, black. Her voice was fire and her eyes never looked away. She sat across from me in the visitation room with folders in her hand and fire in her chest. She said, "They're scared of what this says about the system." She said, "This judge is protecting his record." She said, "We're going to make them see you." She filed for a federal review, civil rights violations, cruel and unusual punishment, denial of due process. I didn't understand all the legal words, but I understood her hunger. She wasn't just fighting for me. She was fighting for every name buried in silence. But Judge Sturgis didn't back down. He doubled down. He gave interviews. Said science doesn't undo justice. Said the victim had suffered enough. Said he wouldn't re-victimize her by reopening old wounds. Re-victimize? I was the one who lost everything. I hadn't felt grass in 10 years. I hadn't hugged my mother. I hadn't held a job, kissed a woman, or sat at a dinner table. But none of that mattered. Not to him. So Amara dug deeper. She found old memos, emails. Turns out the original prosecutor had withheld evidence. A pair of surveillance tapes never entered into discovery. Footage from a gas station that showed me walking home, 2 blocks away, before the time of the attack. It had been buried, labeled non-essential. That changed everything. Now it wasn't just DNA. It was misconduct, suppression, a pattern. The media picked it up again. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox ran it once. Amara stood on courthouse steps and said, "This is not just a miscarriage of justice. This is the murder of a man's life by slow suffocation." People started marching, signs, petitions, hashtags. "Free Devon now, my name," said out loud again, like I mattered. And yet, I was still behind bars. Nights got darker, colder. Time slowed again. I started dreaming of empty rooms, of courtrooms where no one showed up, of freedom that was always 6 feet in front of me, out of reach. I asked Amara once, "What happens if they never let me out?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Because that's the part they never tell you. The justice system doesn't fix itself. It protects itself. And sometimes, even when the truth screams, the door doesn't open. Because someone powerful is invested in keeping it shut. And if you're poor, or black, or invisible, sometimes that door stays locked forever. Now the case is going before the appellate court. A panel of 3 judges. Amara says this is the last shot. One of the judges clerked for Justice Sonia Sotomayor. Another is a Reagan appointee. 50-50, she says. I don't know what I'll do if they say no again. But I know what I won't do. I won't beg. I won't break. I've made it this far. The truth is on my side. But what do you do when truth isn't enough to set you free? They say hope is the most dangerous thing inside a prison, but it's also the only thing that kept me alive. I used to measure my days by meal trays and counts, but after the DNA test, I started measuring time by phone calls from Amara, by court motions, by the sound of her voice saying, "We're getting closer." She never promised freedom, just a fight. And that was enough to keep the noose of hopelessness from tightening around my throat. The appellate court agreed to hear the case. I remember the way my hands trembled when the guard slid the notice under my cell door. 3 judges, 1 courtroom, 1 more chance to be seen, to be heard. Not just as a number or a file or a mugshot, but as a human being. A name. Devon Hale. A man whose truth had been buried deeper than his body would ever be. Amara flew in a week early. She stayed in a cheap motel downtown, poring over files that still smelled like mildew and betrayal. She didn't sleep. Neither did I. I spent those nights walking in circles around the rec yard, tracing the same cracked cement path until my feet went numb. I went over every detail of my case, every inch of the timeline. I memorized the gas station footage, the timestamp, the distance. I wrote it all down on my cell wall in chalk stolen from the commissary. I didn't want to just be a victim. I wanted to be a witness. I wanted to testify for my own damn life. But they wouldn't let me into the courtroom. Said it was non-essential for me to be present. I had to watch the appeal on a grainy monitor in a locked room with one speaker that buzzed like a dying fly. I sat in a plastic chair with shackles on my wrists and hope in my chest, like a wild animal clawing to get out. The courtroom was bigger than I imagined. Clean, cold, sterile. The 3 judges sat high above the room like gods in robes, looking down at the woman who stood for me. Amara wore a gray suit and a scarf Mama would have loved. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. Her voice carried through that busted speaker like thunder trapped in a bottle. She opened with the DNA, laid it out clean, point by point. The biological evidence excludes my client. The fingernail scrapings, the blood on the shirt, the weapon, all point to someone else. My client's DNA was never there because he was never there. Then she hit them with the gas station footage. Time-stamped, undisputed. He was 2 blocks away minutes before the crime. That footage was withheld from the defense. I saw the youngest judge, a black woman in her 40s, lean forward when Amara said that. Then came the hard part. The why. Why had I been denied after the DNA? She said the word like a blade. Finality. Judge Sturgis chose procedural finality over factual innocence, over truth. That's not justice. That's cowardice dressed as law. She paused, looked them each in the eye. My client has spent over a decade in prison for a crime he did not commit. The state's only interest now is in preserving a conviction that never should have happened. This isn't about justice anymore. This is about institutional ego. The courtroom went quiet. Then the Assistant Attorney General stood up. A white man in a navy suit with a voice like sandpaper. He said, "We sympathize with Mr. Hale, but sympathy does not change verdicts." He called the DNA new but not exculpatory. Said the evidence didn't prove who did it, only that it might not have been me. He said the jury had spoken, that reopening the case would set a dangerous precedent for every other conviction. That's when the older judge spoke. White, 60-something, hair like snow, voice like ice. If we start overturning verdicts every time DNA raises questions, where does it end? I clenched my fists. The shackles bit into my wrists. I wanted to scream, "It ends with the truth." But the speaker crackled. The screen flickered, and my voice stayed locked inside my chest. The hearing ended in 45 minutes. 45 minutes to decide whether I'd be a man again or a number for the rest of my life. The panel said they'd return with a ruling in 60 days. 60. I counted them down on my cell wall. I made a mark for every morning the sun rose and I wasn't free. The chalk ran out at day 42. I used a staple after that. Scratched the paint, one stroke at a time. Day 60 came and passed. Nothing. Then day 65. Amara called. No greeting, just silence. Then, Devon. They denied it. I felt everything and nothing at once. Like someone had pulled the floor out from under my soul and I was still standing. On what grounds? I asked. She hesitated. They cited procedural integrity again. 2 judges said the new evidence, while compelling, did not meet the threshold for extraordinary relief. And the third? I whispered. She dissented, Amara said. Wrote an opinion. Said keeping you locked up was a failure of conscience masquerading as law. I hung up without saying goodbye. That night I didn't sleep, didn't pray, didn't eat. Just sat in the dark and let the silence pour over me like cement. Days passed. Then something strange happened. A letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with typed words. You don't know me, but I used to clerk for Judge Sturgis. You need to know. He buried a motion in your case. One that should have triggered release. He blocked it. On purpose. I read it twice, 3 times. Then I stared at the wall for an hour. I passed the letter to Amara during her next visit. She read it with her jaw clenched tight enough to crack bone. I need to find out who sent this, she said. If it's true, this could be the break we need. It took 2 weeks, but she found him. Derek Langston. Used to be a bright-eyed clerk from Stanford Law. Clerked for Sturgis for 3 years. Now teaching at a community college in upstate New York. She flew out and met him in a diner off I-81. He looked tired, worn, said he couldn't sleep at night knowing what he'd seen. He told her Sturgis had received a post-conviction motion tied to the suppressed video evidence. One of the original defense attorneys had filed it without fanfare, quietly, before retiring. But Sturgis never docketed it, never ruled on it. Just filed it under miscellaneous, buried it so no one would know it existed. I confronted him, Derek said. He told me, sometimes justice means protecting the public from its own sentimentality. He said your client was a symbol now. Letting him out would undo too much. Amara recorded the entire conversation. When she played it for me during our next call, I felt my body go cold. This wasn't just error. This was sabotage. Intentional. Evil. We filed a federal misconduct motion, attached the audio, attached the clerk's sworn statement, claimed denial of due process, obstruction, and judicial misconduct. It made the news. Big time. 60 Minutes called. The Department of Justice launched a review. The courthouse where Sturgis presided had protesters on the lawn every day for a month. They started digging into his record. Found a pattern. 12 cases involving black defendants, where exculpatory evidence was either minimized or dismissed. 7 of those men were later released, after years. They found old campaign ads from the 90s where Sturgis stood in front of prison gates and said, "They don't deserve second chances." He started ducking interviews, started saying it was all politically motivated. But then the ethics board launched an inquiry, subpoenaed his records, his emails. They found one sent to the Attorney General's office, dated the week after my DNA results came in. It read, "Even if the evidence is clean, he's not. Don't fall for the optics." The tide started to shift. Pressure mounted. The governor issued a statement. No citizen should remain imprisoned when the facts contradict the conviction. It was no longer about me. It was about all of us. About a system built on punishment, not correction. A machine that ate people and spat out statistics. A machine that protected its gears more than its victims. Then, one morning, I was pulled from my cell at 5 a.m. No warning, no explanation. They walked me into a private room. No shackles. A man in a suit stood there with a folder. He said, "Mr. Hale, I've been authorized to offer you a deal." I didn't speak. He opened the folder. An immediate release agreement. Time served. But it's conditional. Conditional on what? He looked me straight in the eye. You don't sue. You don't speak publicly. You sign a non-disclosure. You walk free. But you keep your mouth shut. I stared at him. I stared at that folder. At freedom, sitting just inches from my hand. And I asked myself the question I never thought I'd have to ask. What's the cost of being free if the truth dies with you? The paper in front of me felt heavier than the shackles I'd worn for 12 years. An offer. Freedom. Signed. Sealed. Silent. The man across from me, some special liaison from the Attorney General's office, didn't blink. He sat there like he'd done this a dozen times before. Like truth was a currency you could trade, and freedom was just another hush deal on government letterhead. I didn't touch the pen. My hands stayed in my lap, clenched so tight I thought my nails might draw blood. He said, This is a rare opportunity, Mr. Hale. You walk out of here. Today. No press. No lawsuits. Just closure. I wanted to scream. Closure. That's what they called it now? A silenced truth. A buried crime. A system that carved my youth out like rot and now wanted me to pretend it never happened. I looked him in the eye and said, "If I sign that paper, you get peace. Not me." That night I stayed up in my cell, listening to the pipes groan and the wind scrape against the windows like claws. I kept thinking of Mama, of the day they arrested me, how she fell to her knees in the kitchen, how her hands trembled when they took my shoes, my hoodie, my name. She died before the DNA test. Never got to know I was innocent. But she knew. Mamas always do. I kept hearing her voice. "You're more than their label, baby. Don't let 'em turn your silence into their story." That's when I knew I couldn't sign it. I couldn't let them win twice. First by caging me, then by muzzling the truth that could burn it all down. I told Amara the next morning. Her eyes didn't widen. She just nodded, said, "Good, because I wasn't going to let you sign it anyway." She had fire in her voice, the kind of fire that could melt steel. "They're scared, Devin. That means we're close, closer than ever." I asked her what the next move was. She said, "We take it federal. Civil rights case, wrongful imprisonment, suppression of evidence. We make it public, loud, unignorable." I felt something rise in my chest, something I hadn't felt since I was 17. Power, not the kind that comes from fists or fear, but the kind that comes from being right, from knowing your truth could shatter lies that built walls around you. The press was already circling. News vans showed up outside the prison gates. They weren't calling me inmate anymore. They were calling me wrongfully convicted teen. Key figure in judicial scandal. I was a headline now, but I didn't care about the words. I cared about the eyes that finally started to see me. The parents, the teachers, the other kids who knew what it was like to be thrown away before your first job, your first vote, your first real chance. Then the threats started. Amara's car tires were slashed in the courthouse parking lot. She got a voicemail with a synthetic voice that said, "Drop the case or lose your license." She didn't flinch, just started parking further away and carrying pepper spray. I asked if she was scared. She said, "You're in a cage, Devin. I'm just in a storm, and storms pass." We filed the civil suit, named Sturgis, named the DA who buried the gas station tape, named the department that handled the evidence like it was garbage. It was a bomb, and they knew it. The case got picked up by the Southern Center for Human Rights. Amara brought on a second lawyer, a former federal prosecutor turned whistleblower named Theo Brooks, a quiet man with dark eyes and hands that looked like they belonged to a preacher. He read my case file and said, "This isn't a mistake. This was method." The hearing was set in federal court, 2 months out. But the tide started rising faster than anyone expected. The governor's office called for an independent review panel. The state bar launched an ethics investigation. And then the judge resigned. Sturgis, gone in a flash. He didn't hold a press conference, didn't admit a damn thing. Just stepped down, citing health reasons. But the timing wasn't lost on anyone. That same day, Amara got an email from an anonymous source. Attached was a PDF, labeled Judicial Notes, Hale Sentencing. Inside was a scanned copy of handwritten comments made during my trial, in Sturgis's own pen. "Deaf not credible, angry kid. Good case for make an example. Jury loves clean victims. And next to my name, underlined twice, was one word. Salvageable? I stared at it so long my eyes stopped blinking. Salvageable. Like I was junk. A maybe. Something not quite ruined, but close enough to discard. I asked Amara, "What do we do with this?" She said, "We use it." The new federal judge assigned to review our motion was different. You could tell. Black robe, clean bench, but something behind her eyes, like she knew the weight of injustice wasn't theoretical. Her name was Judge Corinne Miles, and when she opened the hearing, she said, "We're not here to preserve appearances. We're here to examine facts." I watched the trial from a secured conference room again. Still not allowed in person, but this time, they gave me volume controls. I turned the speaker up loud enough to hear every heartbeat between words. Amara opened again, this time with a storm behind her. The state suppressed exculpatory evidence. The original judge manipulated procedural channels to deny DNA-based innocence, and this young man, this child at the time, was sentenced based on character assessments scribbled in margins. She slammed the handwritten notes on the table. This is what convicted him. Not facts, not evidence, but assumptions, bias, a belief that young, black, poor men are guilty until proven otherwise, and even then, not worth the effort to prove it. The courtroom was still. Then Theo stepped in. He laid out the pattern, the hidden motions, the clerk's testimony, the letter, the threats. "Your Honor," he said, "this is not a case of accidental injustice. This is strategic imprisonment. The system did not fail. It functioned exactly as it was designed, to protect itself." The state attorney stood to respond, but the judge held up her hand. "I've heard enough," she said. "I will issue my ruling by week's end." Back in my cell, I didn't mark days anymore, just minutes. Each one a boulder, each one a whisper, almost. Then, day 3. A letter arrived, stamped with the court seal. Inside, in black print, "The petition for immediate release is granted. The conviction of Devon Hale is vacated. The state is ordered to expunge the record and issue an apology." I dropped to my knees. My heart didn't beat. It roared. I screamed so loud the guards came running. They opened my door like it was a bomb about to go off. And maybe it was. Because that scream carried every second I'd lost, every tear Mama cried, every night I thought I wouldn't make it. I walked out 2 days later, to sunlight that felt too sharp, too bright, like it had been saving its warmth just for me. Amara was waiting. So was Theodore. So were 30 reporters, 3 camera crews, and 100 strangers holding signs with my name. Someone asked, "What will you do now?" I looked into the lens of that camera and said, "Now? Now we fight for everyone they forgot." But freedom isn't simple. It isn't smooth. 2 weeks later, Amara called me at midnight. Her voice was shaky. "They found something." "What?" "Documents, sealed ones, hidden behind a firewall in the district server." I sat up straight. "What kind of documents?" She hesitated. Then, "Devon. I think they knew who actually did it." The silence after Amara's words wasn't peaceful. It was surgical, cold, clinical. The kind of silence that slices right through your ribs and sits behind your heart. They knew who did it. That sentence didn't echo. It detonated. I sat in the dark of my apartment, the one the city paid for after my release, staring out the window while Atlanta pulsed under the moon. My hand gripped the receiver like it could squeeze answers from static. "Are you sure?" I asked. Amara exhaled, slow and haunted. The names redacted on the surface files, but the metadata on the sealed documents, it's all there. We found court memos from 2007, internal discussion between the DA's office and local law enforcement. Her voice dropped. "They flagged another suspect, Devon, before your trial even began." I couldn't breathe for a moment. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the betrayal wrapped in strategy, cold logic, calculated decisions made in office chairs and hallway whispers, while I sat alone in an interrogation room thinking justice was still real. "Who?" I asked. My voice cracked like old wood. Amara didn't answer right away. She sighed again, longer this time. "That's what we're working on now. There's a digital trail, but they scrubbed the primary name. We're tracing aliases, traffic stops, anything linked to the victim's last known contacts." I asked if it was someone I knew. She didn't say no. That silence said enough. The next day, she showed up at my apartment. No press, no fanfare, just a file folder thicker than a Bible and eyes heavy with exhaustion. She laid the folder on my kitchen table. I didn't open it right away. I watched her instead. How her hands shook just slightly when she reached for her coffee. How her jaw kept clenching like she was trying to keep something inside. "You should know," she said. "Once we open this, there's no closing it. This could put careers on the line. People will get scared, desperate." I nodded. "I've been scared for 12 years. Let's balance the scale." The folder was filled with surveillance photos, court transcripts, flagged emails, and one name circled over and over in red: Marcus Keene. I felt my stomach drop. That name, why did it echo like a punch? Amara saw my face. "You know him?" I nodded slowly. "Used to hang around the corner store. Older guy. Kept to himself, but he wasn't invisible." I flipped through the pages. There were records. Keene had been arrested in Alabama for assault 6 months before the murder I was accused of. Charges dropped. Another arrest in Fulton County. Witness tampering also dropped. But the most damning was a grainy photo from a security cam, dated 3 days after the murder of Lila Morrison, the girl I was framed for killing. Marcus Keene, wearing a jacket with her high school logo on it, the one the police said had been burned. "He was never interviewed," Amara said. "Never brought in, despite his name being flagged in connection to a tip call." She slid over an audio transcript, an anonymous call placed to Crime Stoppers, female voice. "I saw someone leave her building. Tall, black, late 30s. Knew her. I think it was someone named Keene. He was mad about something. Said she owed him." The tip was logged, then ignored, buried under paperwork and time. Because the narrative already had its villain. Me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the city until my feet bled, past churches with broken steeples, past liquor stores and corner shops that hadn't changed since I was a boy. I saw a version of myself in every reflection, young, scared, waiting for someone to believe me. And now the truth was here. Ugly, incomplete, but real. I went back to Amara, said, "Let's go public." She hesitated. "Are you ready for that?" I nodded. I wasn't ready for prison either, but I survived that. The next day, we held a press conference. Amara stood beside Theo Brooks, who'd flown back in just for this. Microphones swarmed like flies. Theo began. We now have compelling evidence that another suspect was identified and ignored during the original investigation of the murder of Lila Morrison. This suspect, Marcus Keene, has never been questioned, never arrested, never cleared. And yet, the state chose to pursue a 19-year-old boy with no criminal record instead. Amara stepped forward. This wasn't just injustice. It was obstruction. And it cost Devon Hale 12 years of his life. The air shifted. The public that had rallied for my freedom now had a new villain. They started digging into Keene. So did we. And then things got dangerous. 2 nights later, Amara's office was broken into. Nothing stolen, just ransacked. Files scattered, drawers forced open. One photo of me and her, taken outside the courthouse, left pinned to the wall with a switchblade. We filed a police report, but nobody blinked. Theo said what we were all thinking. They're trying to scare us off. But it didn't work. We tracked down Keene's last known address. Vacant, abandoned. The neighbors hadn't seen him in over a year. But one neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Dawes, said she remembered something. Said he used to get dropped off late at night by a black unmarked car. Said once she saw him hand over a brown envelope to a man in a suit. Said she called it in, but nobody ever followed up. I asked her why she was telling us now. She looked me in the eye and said, "Because I saw your face on TV, and I remembered your mama. She used to buy bread from me. Sweet woman. Didn't deserve to die thinking the world gave up on you." The world hadn't given up, but it sure as hell tried. We pushed harder, filed new subpoenas, reached out to federal oversight agencies. Then something happened we didn't expect. A whistleblower came forward. Anonymous. Worked inside the Fulton County DA's office during my original case. Sent us an encrypted message with one line. Keene was protected. He was an informant. My vision blurred when I read that. Amara whispered, "Jesus!" It made sense. Horrible, perfect sense. Keene wasn't invisible because he was lucky. He was invisible because the system made him that way. He gave them tips. They gave him immunity, even when he killed. But the real horror wasn't that they knew. It's that they decided I was the better sacrifice. I wasn't useful. I was expendable. So they built a case out of shadows and bias and left the real predator free. Amara paced the room. If he was a registered informant, we need the logs, task force approvals, payment records. Theo's face went pale. That's federal. DEA or ATF. Maybe both. We submitted the requests. Got stonewalled. Then came the leak. A journalist at a local paper, one we hadn't spoken to, published a report citing unnamed legal sources. It revealed Marcus Keene had worked as a confidential informant for a joint federal-state narcotics task force for 5 years, during which multiple charges were dismissed against him, including one in 2006, 3 weeks before Lila Morrison was killed. And guess who signed off on that dismissal? Judge Sturgis, the same man who blocked my release for years, the same man who stepped down right before the ethics probe got teeth. The dots weren't just connected. They were fused. Amara said, "We're going to blow this whole thing open." Theo nodded. "Let's prepare for war." I stared out the window again. Same city, different chains. But for the first time, I could almost hear the walls cracking. Then, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. A voice on the other end, deep, gritty, said, "You want to know where Keen is?" My throat tightened. "Who is this?" The voice ignored the question. "He's still alive, but not for long. You better find him first." Click. The line went dead. I didn't sleep that night. The voice still echoed in my head like it came from the walls, not the phone. "You want to know where Keen is?" He didn't threaten me, didn't beg, just delivered a fact laced with danger. He's still alive, but not for long. I stood by the window with the city below me, like a wound that never scabbed. Keen wasn't just the key to my freedom. He was the proof of everything rotten beneath the surface. The question wasn't just where he was hiding. It was, who was willing to kill him to keep him quiet? Amara didn't hesitate. She traced the call, burner phone, dead end. But then she pulled traffic cams from a 2-mile radius around Keen's last known address. It took hours, days, but she found it. A dark sedan parked outside a rundown motel on the east edge of town. License plate registered to a rental agency. Name on the contract? Fake. But the face captured by a gas station security cam nearby wasn't. It was him. Marcus Keen. Older, gaunter, but unmistakable. We had a location, and now a choice. Theo wanted to go to the police. "Let them bring him in. We've got what we need for an arrest." Amara disagreed. "If we wait, he might disappear again, or worse." She looked at me. "What do you want to do?" I closed my eyes. 12 years in a cage. 12 years of being forgotten, buried, erased. And now the man who lit the match was out there, free, hiding from a fire he started. "We go now." It was late when we pulled up to the motel. Rain smeared the windshield like tears. The neon sign flickered. VACANCY, room 12, backside of the building. Amara stayed in the car. Theo and I walked slow, careful. I could hear my heartbeat louder than the rain. I knocked. Silence. Then, shuffling inside, I knocked again. This time, a voice. Rough, cautious. "Who is it?" Theo stepped back. I stood still. "It's Devon Hale," I said. Another silence. Then the sound of a lock unclicking. The door cracked open. Marcus Keen's eyes met mine. Older, sunken, but alert. He looked at me like I was the ghost, and he was the one haunted. "You," he said. His voice rasped like gravel. "You're supposed to be dead." "No," I said. "I'm just supposed to be forgotten." He stepped back. I followed him in. The room smelled like mildew and fear. A half-smoked cigarette lay in an ashtray beside a torn newspaper. Headline: "New evidence surfaces in Hale case." I sat. Theo stood by the door. Keen didn't run, didn't shout, just stared. "I didn't want her to die," he said. I didn't blink. "You knew her?" I asked. He nodded. "She was helping me, rehab stuff, but she found out I was still using. She was gonna report me. I couldn't let that happen. I'd lose my deal." "Your deal with who?" Theo asked. Keen laughed. Dry. Bitter. "With everyone. Cops, feds. They all had me dancing on strings. Drop a name, get a pass. Drop two, get a check. He leaned forward, but they made it clear. If I messed up, I was done. No more protection, no more second chances. So when Lila threatened to expose me, I panicked. I felt my fists clench. 12 years. Because he panicked. And they protected him anyway. Why didn't they come for you? I asked. He shrugged. I was worth more than you. That's the truth. I had value. You had skin. He said it without shame. And suddenly I understood. He wasn't the only monster. The system that protected him was built for men like him. Not just informants, but tools, pawns. And I had been the easiest casualty. Amara called the cops. They came fast, quiet, no sirens. Keene didn't resist, didn't flinch, just smiled as they cuffed him. You think this changes anything? He said. I still played the game. You just caught the replay. But it did change something. Because the next day, the DA's office announced a full inquiry. Because the next week, Judge Sturgis was subpoenaed. Because the next month, the governor issued a formal apology on national television. But none of that gave me back my 20s. None of it gave my mother back the years she died believing her son was a killer. And none of it healed the scar that sat just behind my smile. Still, I stood before a crowd at City Hall when the exoneration bill was signed. Still, I held the pen that would ensure no other name was buried beneath procedural finality. Still, I found something like peace on the other side of truth. But every night I ask myself, why did it take so long? And what happens to the people who never get that knock on the door? If this story moved you, if you believe no one should stay behind bars after DNA proves their innocence, share this video, subscribe, and support organizations like the Innocence Project, who fight for those the system forgot. Your voice matters more than you think. Do you think the judge should face criminal charges for blocking Devon's release despite knowing about the DNA? Why or why not? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation that matters.